Lesson 4, the Vedanta system. The leading school of Hindu philosophy in India, at the present time, is that which is known as the Vedanta system, and which also bears the name of the Uttaramimamsa, which latter term means the subsequent investigation, or the investigation of the latter part, and is used in contradistinction to the term applied to another Hindu philosophical system, that is, the Purvamimamsa, or prior investigation. Some hold that the terms prior and subsequent relate to the date of the founding of the respective schools, while others hold that the prior refers to the investigation of the first part of the Vedas, or ritualistic and ceremonial part, while the subsequent investigation is the investigation that refers to the investigation of the latter part of the Vedas, known as the Upanishads. The latter theory seems to be borne out by the fact that the popular name for the school of the Vedanta means the last of the Vedas. The best authorities give to one Buddhayana the credit of having founded the Vedanta system, although some would dispute this claim and bestow the honor upon Vyasa, a legendary Hindu sage and teacher. The date of the founding of the school is not known, but it is believed to have been previous to Buddhism, and about the time of the founding of the Sankhya system, that is, about 700 BC. In its teachings, the older part of the Vedas, which relates to the orthodox ceremonies, ritual, worship, etc., was recognized and accepted, but not dwelt upon, the attention of the Vedanta being principally devoted to the subject matter of the latter part of the Vedas, known as the Upanishads, which concerns itself with the questions of the inquiry into Brahman, or the Absolute, and the manifestations of the latter in the phenomenal universe. The Vedanta evidently sprang into being, or rather was evolved gradually, in response to the demands of the philosophical minds of India, who desired a grouping together, or scientific arrangement of that part of the general philosophical system of the race which dealt with the one and its relation to the many, rather than with the ecclesiastical ceremonies, ritual, and religious dogmas upon which the early part of the Vedas laid so much stress. And from the first the new system attracted many of the brightest minds of India, and has continued to grow and prosper for about 2000 years, attracting the thoughtful minds of the race to it, and away from the more orthodox systems favored by the priesthood. For while the Vedanta does not oppose the ceremonies and forms of the temples, regarding them as necessary for minds of a certain degree of development, still the system itself is far more of a philosophy of pure reason than a religious system of thought based upon revelation or faith, and much of its success has come by reason of its broadness and catholicity of spirit and doctrine. The Vedanta has offered a friendly refuge to all shades of thought, doctrine and opinion, giving to each that which his particular development called for. Its universality is wonderful when compared with other systems. Holding as it does that there is but one reality, and that all the rest is illusory, it can see degrees of truth in all of the doctrines, and yet recognizes all short of the one as non-truth. As Max Ma 1/4 has said, the Vedanta philosophy leaves to every man a wide sphere of real usefulness, and places him under a law as strict and binding as anything can be in this transitory life. It leaves him a deity to worship as omnipotent and majestic as the deities of any other religion. It has room for almost every religion, nay, it embraces them all. He also says, other philosophies do exist and have some following, but Vedanta has the largest. While the Vedanta flourished from its conception, still its great progress has been made since about AD 800, the date of the great decline of Buddhism in India. Buddhism had driven many of the old orthodox dogmas from the minds of the Hindu people, and yet its doctrine of negation and nothingness did not satisfy the cravings of a race that always had clung close to the spiritual ideals. To return to the old forms was impossible, and yet the new, cold doctrine of Gautama, the Buddha, did not satisfy, although it had been tried for 1,000 years or more. Then, in response to this need, the followers of the Vedanta began to do some propaganda work, in the tolerant, broad spirit that has always characterized the Hindu teachers, who would always admit truth in the conceptions of their opponents, but at the same time would claim a greater truth in their own. And the Vedanta, with its broadness and willingness to admit outsiders without requiring them to cast overboard all of their preconceived and cherished ideas, appealed to the people of India at this time. The Brahma Sutra, the earliest Vedanta work, was supplemented by the most able and brilliant commentary, called the Sariraka Bhashya, from the mind of Sri Sankaracharya, who is regarded by the Vedantists as one of the greatest philosophers that the world ever produced, and who was the second father of the system. It is most difficult to state in a few words the fundamental conception of the Vedanta philosophy, for the reason that it has an inner and an outer doctrine, the outer, or rather several outer ones, being for the masses who are not able to grasp the higher conception of the inner, the latter being reserved for those whose rare philosophic minds enable them to grasp the absolute idealism of the inner teachings. As we have said, the doctrine concerns itself with the inquiry into the Brahman and the manifestation of the latter as the phenomenal universe with its individual soul. The Vedanta fathers found the doctrine of that the absolute Brahman firmly established in the Hindu mind. The one was recognized as the source of all or all itself. Our second lesson, on the inner teachings, has shown you the fundamental conception, which was accepted in a general way by all, notwithstanding the many attempts to account for the manifestation of the material universe. In a general way, the orthodox dogmas held merely that, or Brahman, had manifested or emanated the universe and the individual souls, without attempting to state just how the transformation was effected, how the one became many. It was recognized that the universe must have proceeded from the substance of the infinite and eternal Brahman, for the Hindu mind would never admit that something can come from nothing, but just how this change took place was in doubt. Many of the schools had taught that Brahman had in some way divided itself up into individual souls, and the material universe, although there was here the difficulty of escaping the fundamental idea that Brahman was indivisible. The most favored conception was that of an emanation, as the light from the sun, the odor from the flower, etc. Kapila in his Sankhya philosophy held to the dual aspect of the manifestation, viz., 1. The innumerable individual souls, or Purusha, and 2. The Prakriti, or nature, which supplied the material substratum, and in which the Purushas were entangled and involved. But there was always the general conception of a duality, or at least a dual aspect of the one and the many. And at this point the Vedantists stepped in with the conception of idealism, which held that the one was the only reality, and that consequently all else that appeared to be must be illusory, or an appearance of the one as many, without an actual separation of the one into parts. This illusory universe was due to avidya, or ignorance, occasioned by maya, or illusory appearance. The conception, in its last analysis, is most subtle and suprametaphysical, almost defying explanation except in its own terms. But we shall attempt it here, nevertheless. To begin with, the Vedanta postulates the existence of that, or Brahman, as the only reality and only existence. It accepts the inner teachings, see Lesson 2, regarding the report of the intellect regarding that, and embodies these inner teachings in its fundamental axioms. This one reality, or Brahman, is held to be one and universal, infinite and eternal, indivisible and incapable of separation. This being so, the theories of manifestation must be abandoned, and the term reflection or appearance substituted, for if the one is indivisible, and incapable of separation, and as there is nothing else but the one to manifest, then it follows that all manifestation must be illusory, and nothing but a reflection or an appearance. In other words, all outside and apart from the one must be merely ideals of the one, or else nothing at all. An idea, you know, is the image of an object formed in the mind, and ideal means existing in idea or thought. So, with this bold conception, the Vedantists brushed away all the previous conceptions and theories, including that of Kapila with his individual Purushas, or spirits, and his Prakriti, or nature, holding that even these aspects or principles must be merely ideals and existing merely in the mind of the one. But at the same time it accepted all of the existing conceptions and theories of the other schools, provisionally, and allowed the converts to retain them, holding that these conceptions were useful in helping the undeveloped minds to think of the one the best they knew how, and leading up to a point when they could conceive of the one divested from these misconceptions of Maya occasioned by avidya, or ignorance. And so, in the end, we see that the efforts of the Vedanta teachers must be directed toward explaining the nature and characteristics of this baleful Maya, which so distorts the truth that it is not recognized, that causes the piece of rope on the ground to be mistaken for the snake, arousing all the terrors and horror that the real snake would have caused. For in the understanding of Maya, and the escape from its entanglements, lies the road to freedom and emancipation of the spirit whose eyes are blinded with the smoked glasses of Maya. Let us first consider the Vedanta conception of the One. Brahman, the one absolute substance, is held to be beyond qualities or attributes, beyond subject and object, to be the source of being, intelligence and bliss. It is the efficient cause of the universe in its spiritual, mental and material appearances, creator and creation, doer and deed, cause and effect, the underlying truth amidst the universe of unreality, one self-existent, all there is, all that ever has been, all that ever can be, one and only, alone, with nothing within itself, and nothing outside of itself, unique without a second. Since it is all there is, and cannot be divided into parts, nor subject to change, then it must follow that the self of each of us must be in some way identical with the self of the One, instead of being a part of or emanation of it, that the self or spirit in us must be the identical spirit of the One, undivided and whole. Outside of this self there is nothing, and therefore there is non-duality, the duality of the other schools being held false. Surely this is a startling conception, never before equaled in the history of Hindu philosophy, and most difficult of comprehension. No wonder that it has been called the highest pinnacle of philosophic thought which the human mind can possibly attain, or, as Schlegel has said, even the loftiest philosophy of the Europeans, the idealism of reason as it is set forth by the Greek philosophers, appears, in comparison with the abundant light and vigor of Oriental idealism, like a feeble Promethean spark in the full flood of heavenly glory of the noonday sun, faltering and feeble, and ever ready to be extinguished. And as Max Ma von Fortler says, Vedanta holds a most unique position among the philosophies of the world. After lifting the self or the true nature of the ego, Vedanta unites it with the essence of divinity, which is absolutely pure, perfect, immortal, unchangeable, and one. No philosopher, not even Plato, Spinoza, Kant, Hegel, or Schopenhauer, has reached that height of philosophic thought. A broken bar, none of our philosophers, not excepting Herodotus, Plato, Kant, or Hegel, has ventured to erect such a spire, never frightened by storms or lightnings. Stone follows upon stone in regular succession after once the first step has been made, after once it has been clearly seen that in the beginning there can have been but one, as there will be but one in the end, whether we call it Atman or Brahman. The student who, for the first time, follows the Vedanta teachings up the narrow path of reasoning that leads to the highest pinnacle of philosophic thought, finds himself panting for breath in the thin, rarefied atmosphere of those exalted peaks, and feels the chill of the mountain air pervading his being. And when the highest peak of all is surmounted, he is apt to gaze affrighted at the lower peaks, and the valleys and canyons far beneath him, and he begins to wonder how he ever will be able to descend to solid earth once more. Or, dropping figurative terms, he begins to wonder how any reasoning mind will be able to explain the existence of the phenomenal universe, after having postulated a one being that is indivisible, unchanging, and all, with the accompanying postulate that something cannot be evolved from nothing. Surely the original Hindu philosopher who first reached this plane of thought had the courage of his logical convictions, and the fearlessness that springs from a consciousness of truth attained. But let us see how the Vedantist philosophers extricate themselves from this predicament, from which there would seem to be no logical escape. In the first place, the Vedantist cannot avail himself of that principle of Kapila, which forms one of the dual principles of his Sankhya system, namely, the principle of Prakriti, or nature, which supplies the material substratum for the universe, and which is energized by the Purushas, or spirits. These principles, if admitted at all by the Vedantists, are immediately classified with other phenomenal things, and are taken out of the consideration for the purpose before us. The Vedantist has nothing else but Brahman to start with. Where does he get his phenomenal universe and his individual souls? Not from nothing, not from a separation, division or change in Brahman, for Brahman is above these things. Then where else, or from what else, can they be evolved? Here are the several answers of the Vedantins. I. The answer of the Vishishtadvaita school, or branch of the Vedanta, which was founded by Ramanuja, who lived about the same time as Sankaracharya, the founder of the Advaita or monistic school of Vedanta, and which school of Ramanuja is called the qualified monistic or else qualified dualism, holds that Brahman contains within himself elements of plurality, or modes of existence, and which elements or modes share his reality, and are at one with himself, although apparently separate and individual. That is to say, Ramanuja holds that just as the individual cells of the human body, or groups of such cells, including the blood corpuscles, may be considered as of the man, rather than as separate parts of him, and at the same time manifest individuality, so are the individual souls of Brahma, and not separate from him, although apparently individuals. This school holds that the material universe is an illusion occasioned by these individual souls, which are really elements of Brahman, being diluted by avidya, or ignorance, which produces maya, the cause of the material universe. When these individual souls realize their nature and identity with Brahman, the spell of maya is over, and the soul escapes samsara and returns to its original state of bliss. The above explanation would seem to be a partial answer keeping fairly well within logical lines, but the Advaitists, or monists, or non-dualists, who compose the other great branch of the Vedanta, regard this explanation and doctrine as but a half-truth, and consider it unworthy of the true Vedanta. And, without prejudice, it must be admitted that the school of Ramanuja seems to attempt a compromise, and bids a retreat after having fixed its standard on the philosophic heights. It seems like a compromise with the position of the Sankhya's, with their individual souls, or else with the Patanjali school, with their individual souls and their universal Purusha, as you may see in the forthcoming lessons. Or, looking at it another way, it would seem as if Ramanuja was changing his conception or postulate of a one infinite, eternal being, incapable of change or division, into another conception or postulate of an atomic Brahman composed of countless elements or modes, which, while not called parts, still destroy the non-particled conception or postulate of Brahm with nothing within itself, and nothing without itself. It certainly appears that Ramanuja's final position is a retreat from his original one, and that he either was afraid to carry the original conception to its logical conclusion, or else feared that the people could not grasp the extreme position. This last idea seems to be correct, in part, for many Hindus who adhere to the Vedanta teaching are not able to grasp the extreme idealistic position of the Advaita school of Sankaracharya, and are better satisfied with the qualified monism of the Vishishtadvaita school of Ramanuja. While it is true that it may be said that there really are two schools of Vedanta, as above stated, each equally entitled to the name Vedantist, it still remains true that philosophical students, without prejudice, both in India and in the West, recognize in the Advaita the true Vedanta, that is, the Vedanta in which the thought and argument is carried logically forward from premise to conclusion, the extreme logical consequence being admitted, and not feared or compromised. The Vishishtadvaita school seems more allied with some of the schools of the Sankhya, or the Yoga, than to its companion Vedantist school. And in our continuation of this lesson on the Vedanta, we shall consider the Advaita school as representing the original Vedanta doctrine carried to its logical and natural conclusion, believing that the facts of the case warrant the same. Before passing to the Advaitist explanation of the existence of the phenomenal universe, however, let us stop a moment and consider some conceptions held by certain Vedantists belonging to neither of the great schools, independent reasoners, as it were, seeing a view of truth from their own viewpoint. These independent Vedantists hold to a conception that is an approach to a conception of a manifestation, and yet is not such in full truth something that may be spoken of as an apparent manifestation, as it were. These views are chiefly expressed in symbols. For instance, one class will compare Brahman and the individual souls to the sparks arising from the blazing fire and returning thereto, but being always within the heat waves of the fire, and therefore not separate, although appearing to be so. Another class favors the illustration of the perfume arising from a flower, which, while apparently apart from the flower, is still of it. Another class favors the illustration of the rays of the sun, which, while seemingly apart, are still of the sun. These illustrations all partake of the nature of emanations, however, and have a resemblance to a manifestation. But still another class, while very near to those just mentioned, favors a reflection rather than an emanation, admitting the existence of a something else as a background to, or object of, the reflection, which something they call Maya, as do the Advaitists, as we shall see later. This reflection class compare the relation between Brahman and the individual souls to the reflection of the midday sun upon a million raindrops, each of which seems to contain a miniature sun, the basis of which is the sun itself, which is not affected by its countless reflections. This conception has strength, is firmly held to by many, although it implies the existence of a something illusory to correspond to the raindrops, and must also recognize that the reflection itself depends upon an emanation of the sun's light and rays. But perhaps we are pushing the figure of speech further than perfect fairness would dictate. This idea of a reflection seems to exercise a hold upon many careful minds among the Hindus. It seems to contain a hint of an underlying truth that subtly escapes the grasp of the mind that would make it its own. The figure is sometimes altered so that the illustration is that of the sun casting a reflection of itself into countless vessels or jars of water, and thus giving light and spirit presence to the water contained within the earthen jars. The illustration of the jar as the material body, the water as the mind, and the light as the spirit, is a beautiful poetic conception, and one that has a close correspondence with certain occult conceptions of the relations of the three. And now for the conception and explanation of the Advaita school of Vedanta, founded by Saint Gurukriya, the true Vedanta of the scholars, the school of absolute monism, absolute idealistic monism. What is its explanation of the existence of the phenomenal universe, and the individual souls given by this great school? Let us listen to its report. The Advaitist position may be emphasized by a quotation from Max Ma 1/4, who closed one of his celebrated lectures of the Vedanta with these words: "In one half verse I shall tell you what has been taught in thousands of volumes. Brahman is true, the world is false, the soul is Brahman and nothing else." In other words, that instead of there being countless individual souls, either manifested, created, emanated, or reflected, being entangled in the principle of substance of Maya, or Prakriti, and losing their identity, and building up a false universe by reason thereof, instead of this, there is postulated Brahman itself, entangled and involved in this baleful principle of Maya, deluded by its illusion, involved in its glamour, Brahman itself imagining itself separated into countless individual spirits or souls, and erecting an imaginary universe of the senses which serves to bind it more and more. This is a crude expression of the doctrine, but a true one, stated in its bareness and boldness. Have thinkers ever dared to say this before? If so, the history of philosophy fails to reveal the fact. Yes, this is the essence of the Advaita teaching, the infinite involved in a figment of its own imagination, losing itself in a dream of a phenomenal universe, and believing itself to be countless individual spirits or selves, instead of the one spirit and one self, the all. Surely this is the most daring flight of the human mind in the thin and rarefied air of idealistic philosophy, but still it is but carrying the premise to its logical conclusion, and then escaping from the inevitable, vexatious alternative by the manifestation of the highest degree of mental courage and honesty. This is the extreme position of the Vedanta idealistic philosophy. Brahman being the one reality, indivisible, immutable, and alone, it must follow that the phenomenal manifestation of samsara and its accompanying material universe are but elusive fictions, figments of the imagination or dream state of Brahman itself, the first state of the fantasy being the illusion of separateness, the subsequent being the illusion of the sense universe appearing to the souls, which themselves are but illusory fictions in the mind of Brahm. It is Brahm who sees himself reflected from the water drops, or water jars, of Maya, and imagines that he is many instead of one. It is Brahm who sees himself through the countless eyes of the individual reflections of himself. The individual souls persist in their illusory and fictitious reflection or semblance, so long as the bonds of samsara hold the attention, but they are but Brahman himself all the while. Throughout the organisms and forms thus built up, this deluded Brahm, manifesting as countless unitary reflections and semblances of himself, acts, moves, and plays its many parts upon the stage of Maya, identifying himself with the countless images of characters existing solely in his imagination, or dream. Only by realizing this unity, this truth, may each soul escape, one by one, from Maya and awaken from the dream of samsara. Only by knowledge may the soul escape its isolation and return to a consciousness of its real self. The Advaitists do not accept all of the fundamental conceptions of that, or Brahman. In fact, they discard all these conceptions as attempts to bestow attributes or qualities upon that which is above them. They refuse to consider that in its aspects as the absolute essence of substance or space, or in the other aspect of the absolute essence of motion at rest, or in the third aspect, of the essence of absolute law in itself. They brush all this aside, and, claiming to rise higher than the original source of their philosophic thought, they postulate that, Brahman, as being pure intelligence absolute, and which may be considered as Satchitananda, or absolute existence knowledge bliss. The deluding Maya, which we shall consider at length presently, is held to be more than individual ignorance of the souls, and is the shadow of reality, of eternal duration, and of cosmic extension and significance. Its origin is veiled in mystery and obscurity. But while it is not eternal, or real, for it passes away during the night of Brahm, only to appear again when the creative activity once more begins, still it is something more than a manifestation. In fact, while in itself it is not real, it may be said that there is that in Brahman which produces it and which is real. The possibility and latency of Maya, so to speak, is inherent in Brahman. This Maya is regarded as the material cause of the world, just as in the Sankhya the Prakriti is so regarded, but Maya is not regarded as a something as is Prakriti, for it is merely a covering or shadow of something. And yet the Advaitists do not teach that the phenomenal life and universe is a nothing, as do the Buddhists. They regard it as an illusory appearance of an underlying reality, which appearance is unreal, and yet real for all practical purposes, and which must be so considered in sane reasoning and action. As Max Ma 1/4 has said concerning this point, for all practical purposes, the Vedantist would hold that the whole phenomenal world, both in its subjective and objective character, should be accepted as real. It is as real as anything can be to the ordinary mind. It is not mere emptiness, as the Buddhists maintain. And thus the Vedanta philosophy leaves to every man a wide sphere of real usefulness, and places him under a law as strict and binding as anything can be in this transitory life. And this may be understood when you consider that even in the imagination or dream of Brahman there must be an element of actuality. Samsara is not absolutely fictitious, although illusory. Phenomena are merely indicative of the illusory appearance of an underlying reality. Dreams are true, while they last, says the poet. Therefore the phenomenal universe may be considered as true, so long as the truth is not known. When Brahma wakes, the universe disappears. The souls know that they are one. The universe and the souls are not absorbed into Brahman, but Brahman arouses itself, and the phenomenal appearance fades away, as do the dreams of the night, or the daydreams of the waking hour. The Advaita conception regards Brahman as the real cause of the universe, because it all proceeds from him, and also as the operative cause, because the processes of Maya, which are akin to those of the Prakriti of the Sankhya, depend upon the proximity and existence of Brahman, inasmuch as Maya has no energy of its own, but acts by the energy of Brahman reproduced in Maya by induction, similar to the action of the magnetism of a magnet inducing magnetic properties in the particles of steel. Thus Maya, although inert of itself, becomes active by reason of its proximity to Brahman. The student will notice that the Advaitists use the same figure of speech, the magnet and the bits of steel, that is used by the Sankhyas in illustrating the action of the Purushas upon Prakriti. In fact, there are many points of resemblance between the Sankhya Prakriti and the Vedanta Maya, the principal difference being that the former is regarded as a fundamental principle of nature, while the latter is regarded as an illusory figment of the imagination or dream of Brahman, or, rather, as the imagination or dream condition itself. As an authority says, Maya, the inexplicable illusion, self-imagined, has been the unreal adjunct illusorily overspread upon Brahman from all eternity. Before proceeding with our consideration of the nature of Maya, as stated by the Advaitists, let us consider the teachings regarding the operation of avidya, or ignorance, through Maya. This avidya, which is held to be of cosmic extent and effect, operates in two ways by means of Maya. The first way is in the enveloping of Brahman and producing the illusion of the many selves. The second way is the projecting of the phenomenal and material universe by reason of the first error or illusion. This projection is as follows: by avidya, through Maya, is projected the subtle elements of ether, air, fire, water and earth. From these subtle elements is evolved the 17 subtle principles and the 5 gross elements. The 17 subtle principles comprise the 5 senses, viz., sight, hearing, smell, taste, and feeling; the 2 mental principles of buddhi, the principle of understanding, reasoning, determining, etc., and manas, the principle of will and imagination, respectively. Also the 5 principles controlling the organs of action, namely, the organs of speech, the hands and feet, the organs of excretion, and the organs of generation, respectively, and the 5 vital airs, or vital energies, or forms of prana. The 5 gross elements are evolved from the 5 subtle elements, in certain combinations and phases, and from the operation and activities of which precede the material universe. The above classification of the principles is common to the majority of the Hindu philosophical systems, and seems to have descended from some common ancient source, and to have been accepted without question by the founders of the systems, and incorporated with their doctrines and conceptions. You will notice these principles appearing in the other systems considered in these lessons. The best modern authorities do not take this classification of principles very seriously, and are apt to regard them as in the nature of worn-out systems of the past, although as the mental principles are concerned, and the psychology arising therefrom, the Hindu thinkers hold that they are much better ideas of the operation of the mind than any Western theories, or hypotheses, with the exception of the conception of the mental principles. Therefore, the balance of the classification may be omitted from the serious consideration of the philosophies, as the fundamental conceptions of the same are not affected thereby. The Vedanta adheres to the prevailing Hindu conception of the several principles or sheaths of the individual soul, which may be stated as follows: 1. The rupa, or physical body; 2. The jiva or prana, or vital force; 3. The linga sharira, or astral body, or etheric double; 4. The kamarupa, or animal soul; 5. The manas, or human soul; 6. The buddhi, or spiritual soul; 7. Atman, or spirit. The last 3 principles compose the reincarnating soul, while the first 4 disintegrate at the death of the body, or shortly after. This classification is common to the several Hindu philosophies, and the students of our own system will find them agreeing with our own classification of the 7 principles. See our 14 lessons in Yogi philosophy. The Vedantists hold to the teachings of reincarnation and karma, which form a part of the fundamental philosophical and religious thought of the race. To the Vishishtadvaita school of Ramanuja, samsara, or the cycle of existence, and karma, mean the evolution and progress of the soul through the mists of avidya and maya back to the realization of itself as an element in the nature of the One. But to the Advaita school of Sankaracharya, samsara, with its incidents of reincarnation and karma, is but a part of the universal illusion, and both disappear when the soul awakens to the fact that it is not an individual entity, but a distorted reflection or appearance of Brahman himself, created by him in his imagination or dream. Reincarnation and karma are thus, in full truth, held to be nothing but maya arising from avidya, which is annihilated by the awakening to vidya or knowledge of the truth, which informs the soul that it is Brahman and bids it awaken from its dream of samsara, at which maya fades away like the mist of the morning before the rays of the sun. But, as we have said, the doctrine holds that for practical purposes the samsara is true, and reincarnation and karma facts to be reckoned with, for until the sleeper awakes the world of experience is the only real one to the soul, and its laws and rules, of which reincarnation and karma form a part, stand untouched and fully operative. Only when man becomes Brahman do they cease to rule him, for, at the end, says the Advaitist, if there is in reality nothing to reincarnate or to be affected by karma, then rebirth, death, and karma are seen to be nothing but manifestations of maya itself, the machinery of the dream. And so, while holding to the truth of reincarnation and karma with firm and positive teaching, still in the end the Advaita denies its ultimate reality. Among the ranks of the Vedantists are to be found many who cling to the idea of Ishwara, the personal God, the demiurge, or the Logos. And, notwithstanding the advanced position of some of the Vedanta sects, there is no opposition to this doctrine, and a place is found for it under the big tent of Vedanta Catholicity. Ishwara is explained, and harmonized with the fundamental teaching, by admitting the conception that when the creative processes begin, Brahman, overspread with Maya, first manifests as Ishwara, and then from Ishwara proceeds the remainder of the creation. Thus the individual soul is held to be identical with Ishwara, and Ishwara identical with Brahman. Thus Ishwara represents the collective totality of the various principles manifested in the individual forms and units of the phenomenal universe. Ishwara is the universal soul, containing within his soul the collective totality of the three higher principles of the soul diffused among the individual souls, and containing within his body the collective totality of the four lower principles. See the above classification of the 7 principles of man. Ishwara may be worshipped as a personal god, and loved as an oversoul. But even Ishwara is but an appearance in Maya, and in the end must awaken to the fact that he is not in himself, but everything in Brahman. And the individual soul, seeing the truth, may ignore Ishwara, and piercing his illusory nature may proceed direct to the bosom of Brahman. Thus does the Vedanta supply the one of each class of followers satisfy the hunger of each soul, according to its nature. While postulating an abstract that, or absolute, it still allows the intervention of an Ishwara, or personal god, with a universal human nature and character, without being inconsistent or compromising. It willingly admits anything in Maya, but denies everything in truth except Brahman itself. That in the words of Maxima 1/4, Brahman is true, the world is false, the soul is Brahman and nothing else. From the beginning to the end, Vedanta is consistent and logical, facing the consequences of its extreme conclusions without a tremor, and steadfastly refusing to beat a retreat. A most remarkable manifestation of human philosophical speculation without parallel. And now for this strange and inexplicable Maya, that illusion, imagination, or dream, that overspreads the being of Brahman and causes him to imagine vain things, and to dream of strange happenings. What of Maya? We must confess that at this point the Advaitists are brought face to face with the focused energies of the argument and opposition to their system and doctrine. It is their heel of Achilles, their only vulnerable point, in the opinion of outside thinkers, although they, themselves, do not admit this, and claim that the doctrine of Maya is as safely encased in armor as the rest of their system. From whence arises Maya? There is no outside source, and it must come from Brahman himself. Then why does he permit it? What is the cause of Maya? Some of the leading Advaitist teachers refuse to entertain the question in this shape, asserting that to suppose the necessity of a cause or reason for Brahman's creations would be to assume something to which Brahman was subject, something ruling, determining or influencing the infinite, a palpable absurdity. They say that Maya appears, and therefore must be in accord with Brahman's nature and being, and not contrary to his will or desire, if such relative terms may be permitted regarding the Absolute. Therefore Brahman, himself, is the reason or cause or why of Maya, and beyond that they refuse to go, claiming that this mystery is locked up in Brahman himself, and that the question can no more be answered than the why, reason, or necessity of the existence of Brahman itself. And so in the end even the advanced Advaitist confesses himself unable to consider and answer that great ultimate question that has ever perplexed the great philosophical minds that were able to realize that such a question existed. The question, why did God create the universe, since he is not bound by necessity or desire, since nothing can be accomplished by it, since there is nothing that can be that has not always been, be the universe illusion or reality? Why was it created? So it always has been, so it is now, so perhaps, will it be always, for none but God himself the Absolute can answer this question from full knowledge, for such full knowledge is God himself, or the Brahman, of absolute intelligence. This is indeed the riddle of the Sphinx. But the failure to answer this ultimate question, or why, does not deter the Advaitist from speculating concerning the nature of Maya. To some Maya is identical with a principle of nature or a creative energy, which is inherent in the being of Brahman, and which he brings into play, willing to will it into activity, and willing to involve himself in it, temporarily. To others Maya is in the nature of a Brahmic imagination, in which he plunges in reverie akin to the daydream of the man. To others Maya is as the true dream condition, in which the dreams are true while they last, and from which Brahman finally arouses himself, little by little, each individual's awakening contributing a little. To others Maya is the mental state of reverie or meditation into which Brahman plunges himself, and objectifies universes and characters, as the artist objectifies the characters and scenes of his mental creation of story, poem, drama, painting, or sculpture, from his subjective self, or inner consciousness. Others hold that Brahman desires to express himself into relative objectivity and activity, and attempts to do so over and over again, but finding that the same is impossible, he is forced to beat a retreat, and relinquish the effort. But this last is a rather more the speculation of a Vedantist affected by the Buddhist or Schopenhauer-like thought of an unconscious and unintelligent absolute trying to express itself into consciousness, and being forced to a retreat by the pain arising therefrom. This idea is not true to the Vedantist ideal and conception, although it has been advanced by some good teachers. To others it has seemed that Braham first conceived of the abstract ideas of time, space and causation, the three great relative principles, and in meditating upon these three relativities he began to consider himself in connection with them through their triple glasses of thought, as it were, and thus arose the avidya that produced the Maya, that produced the phenomenal universe, and caused Braham to consider himself as the many in time, space and causation. In all of the speculations, which concern themselves with the how rather than the why, of Maya, remember, there is the underlying thought that Maya must be a mental something, that is, something arising in the mind of Braham, if such a relative term may be used, and also the conception that in some mysterious way Braham is involved and wrapped in his imaginings, dreams, or conceptions, or mental creations. These two ideas underlie all of the speculation regarding Maya, and all agree that pain, misery and unhappiness result from this involvement of Brahma in his mental creations, even though, as the teachers say, the total period of the creation, existence, and death of universe, is as but the twinkle of an eye to Braham, that is, it is practically instantaneous, from start to finish, just as even a man may dream a lifetime in a few moments. One of the Hindu teachers gave this parable illustrating the idea of Brahma being involved in his creative processes. Indra, one of the gods, once descended into nature, or Prakriti, in order to gain experience, and so incarnated as a pig, losing all knowledge of his true nature. He wallowed in the mud, and grew fat and big, with great tusks. He took unto himself a pig wife, and soon found himself surrounded by a brood of baby pigs, and was very happy by reason of his pig family. Some of the other gods, seeing his loss of recollection of his real self, and his belief in the reality of his pig nature, sought to arouse him from his illusion, saying, arouse thyself, Indra, thou art a god. But Indra grunted lazily, go away, and disturb me not, I am a pig, and am happy. What do I care for your heavens, with my mud, and my sound baby pigs? Go away. But the friendly companion gods, wishing to arouse him, killed his baby pigs, and later his wife pig. But Indra wept and wailed, squealed and bit, and snorted his rage and sorrow. Finally, in despair, they killed his pig body itself, as they would any other pig, whereupon Indra emerged freed from his delusion, and laughed when told what a dream he had indulged in, and once more resumed his god life. But what would have been Indra's sorrow, had he been compelled to work out his freedom through the repeated rebirths and karma, of samsara, as do the individual souls in their road to freedom and emancipation. Those of you who have read our views regarding the nature of the manifestation of the universe by the Absolute, in our lessons on Jnana Yoga, will realize that while we accept the Vedanta conception of the oneness of being, and the all being all in all, yet we do not admit or hold that the Absolute loses the knowledge of itself and its creations, but on the contrary preserves that knowledge intact, and that the reflection of the Absolute in each individual soul constitutes the indwelling spirit of the soul, its real self, and that while the nature of the universe is that of a mental creation of the Absolute, and the Absolute finds itself reflected in the ideas of the universe, and that all in that universe are ideas of the Absolute, still the creation is deliberate and in pursuance with some design and plan of the Absolute, the reason thereof being beyond human knowledge, and is not the result of ignorance or of avidya on the part of the Absolute, such thought being inconsistent with the fundamental conception of infinite wisdom. We regard Maya, or Prakriti, as the great creative principle emanated from the Absolute, and avidya or ignorance, we hold, is confined to the phenomenal world, and has no place or existence in the Absolute, but is itself the product of Maya. We must refer you to our Jnana Yoga for the details of our conception, although the above will give you, briefly, an idea of the points of our agreement with, and the points of our difference from, the Vedanta philosophy. Our own system is eclectic in its nature, and has points of agreement with, and points of difference from, each of the other principal systems of the Hindu philosophy, and, besides, advances many independent conceptions and interpretations not found in the said systems, and which are part of the great body of eclectic philosophical thought in India which has refused to identify itself with any of the schools or systems. Special message 4. In our message of last month, we gave you the first 3 of the axioms of truth, those symbols whereby we seek to enter into an understanding of the nature of truth. In the message of this month, we continue the presentation of the axioms, the symbols. We invite you to consider the 3 following axioms of truth. 4. We may consider truth by means of the symbol of creative activity. Not only has truth the creative energy, but it is also the creative energy itself. Other than truth there can be no creative energy. All that is, ever has been, or ever can be created, must have been manifested, expressed or emanated by the creative energy of truth. Truth is the cause, source and reason for all creation. There is nothing outside of, or apart from, truth that can create and, therefore, can be nothing created by anything outside or apart from truth. All else is error, untruth. We may consider truth by means of the symbol of intelligence. Not alone is truth omniscient or all-wise, but it is also omniscience or all-wisdom itself. Outside, or apart from truth, there is not, never has been, and never can be, any wisdom. All the evidences of wisdom that we see must be manifestations, expressions or emanations from truth. Truth is the source of all wisdom and is the fount from which all wisdom must be drawn. All apparent knowledge outside of or apart from truth is untruth. We may consider truth by means of the symbol of good. Truth is the all-good. Truth is good, our intuitive realization of the good above us and to which the higher part of our being always yearns if allowed to follow its highest inclinations, informs us that there is good. And truth being the only being and reality must be that good. Any other supposition is impossible and contrary to the highest intuition of the human mind. The reality of good and its identity with truth, comes to man not through his reason alone, but also from a higher part of his being, and constitutes the divine message to the race. Not only is truth good in the sense of possessing good, but it also is goodness itself. Truth is the essence of good, and all good must proceed from truth, for there is no other place whence it could have come. Outside and apart from truth, there can be no good. All else is untruth. In our next month's message, we shall continue this consideration of the symbolic axioms, whereby we seek to enter into an understanding of the nature of truth. Our meditation for the coming month is, truth is the all-creative energy, the all-wisdom, the all-good, and outside of truth there can be and is no creative energy, no wisdom or intelligence, no good.